Hey, how's it going, everybody? How's everybody doing today? Because I am not doing well with more updates coming out of the Gaza Strip. Not positive updates, some pretty negative updates. Pretty bad updates, okay? So, as I was starting to go live, I was able to get confirmation from not from some fan account, but directly from the IDF that Israeli ground forces are currently attacking the Gaza Strip. This is in combination with the Israeli Air Force going in and continuing its bombing campaign. The current death toll, I believe, has passed 70, with about 15 to 16 children among the dead in Palestine. 6 Jews have been killed in rocket attacks, and lynchings are happening throughout all of Israel, especially in mixed Jewish and Palestinian Arab neighborhoods. People are walking by to cars that are passing, stopping those cars and trying to check if they are Jewish or Arab to decide if they're going to get lynched. One of these lynchings even happened on live television, where a man's car was attacked, an Arab man. He was pulling out and beaten on live TV. He was beaten until he was unconscious and laying on the floor, and then he was continued to be beaten, as in he is out of it, and they are continuing to use a flag, a pole with an Israeli flag on it, to beat him unconscious while he's unconscious. There have been videos coming out of people trying to break into the homes of Palestinians to lynch them. Violence has spiraled out of control on the streets of Israel. This spans from Tel Aviv all the way to East Jerusalem. Hamas continues to escalate rocket fires as they continue to fire more and more rockets. And the Iron Dome defense system, overwhelmed by the vast amount of rockets, has not been able to stop them all. This has led to the death of Jewish civilians. As of right now, it's 6, including some children. Okay. There are some updates. Now, when it comes to the ground forces attacking attacking the Gaza Strip. As of right now, originally, due to the tweet that was put out by the IDF, people thought we were about to have a 2014 style operation. If you don't know, that is when the IDF invaded the Gaza Strip in 2014 during an operation after a different set of escalations. That does not seem to be the case currently. That is what we originally thought. What is actually going on is, in coordination with the Israeli Air Force, the IDF has decided to move tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery to the border of the Gaza Strip. And that artillery on the border with the Gaza Strip is currently pounding the Gaza Strip. So not only is the Air Force bombing the Gaza Strip, now artillery has also been added to its arsenal to bomb the Gaza Strip. This will obviously lead to a rise in the death toll. And I don't know how Hamas will, of course, respond. Well, Hamas will most likely respond with more rockets. Abbas, the president of Palestine, has responded to this escalating situation, saying that Palestinians have a right to their land and that they will not back down. This is in reference to the evictions in East Jerusalem. Anyway, those are the bare basics of the updates. We're going to check the updates ourselves in a moment, but the amount of footage I have seen of violence is utterly repulsing. I mean, repulsive, completely repulsive. It's not difficult to find videos of lynchings and or missile strikes and bombings. Footage like this is now being produced in the Gaza Strip on the regular, as more bombs are dropped every day. It seems that the airstrikes are not in the dozens. They have passed into triple digits on the daily. As in, there are about, from so far what I'm seeing, hundreds of airstrikes a day. Not a few, not dozens, hundreds. Yesterday, during our stream, I was able to pull up a live stream of the Gaza Strip, and every 5 minutes it seemed, airstrikes were occurring, and that was just out of one part of the entirety of the Gaza Strip. We were seeing this escalating situation with airstrikes, and that was just from one perspective. Those airstrikes are going to get more frequent, they're going to occur more, and they're going to continue to escalate. Just wanted to make that clear before we continued into the news stories. Now, let's start going through these. Let's start with CNN. Oh, actually, no, the BBC. Oh, also, Netanyahu has now seemed to preserve his prime ministership. It seems that the other coalition that was forming, one of the right-wingers that were going to be part of the coalition, has broken down and backed off of making that coalition, meaning that most likely Israel is headed, during all of this, to another round of elections. And if we are headed towards another round of elections, while this is going on, this situation bodes very well for the Israeli far right. When we see lynchings on the street of Palestinian Arabs, and of course there's also been lynching of Jews, that situation, combined with the constant air sirens going off due to the Hamas missiles being launched, is a perfect situation for an Israeli far-right electoral victory. We actually had a caller from yesterday's call-in stream, which I recommend you all tune on Wednesdays for call-in streams. And we discussed this. We discussed how, due to Netanyahu backing off of allowing Jews onto the Temple Mount as the situation escalated, that the far right was turning on him temporarily. But in the long term, if we see another round of elections later with no real move by the Israeli left, quote unquote, then it would not bode well. It seems that situation has sped up quicker. And we were going to see elections a lot sooner than we thought. Possibly. At least, so far, that's what it's pointing towards. It seems that Netanyahu has preserved his power for at least the time being, heading into another round of elections. What is Netanyahu? Whenever the doorbell rings, Rose successfully points to the door and says, "Yum yum time." Why did you send me this? South, why did you send me this? We're talking about ground forces engaging in combat on the Gaza Strip, and you send me something about yum yum time.
استنى صور فيديو عشان بنثبت للناس القرية ضل الناس من القرية.
You know, we should pray for Palestine, but we should also pray for better footage.
والعزبة وبيت حنون والعزبة وبيت حنون كله طلع اطلع من الجميع واطلع يمينه.
So obviously, with the escalating violence, many Palestinian civilians are going to be fleeing the Gaza Strip due to the escalating airstrikes and military operations. They want to flee the violence always. Yeah, a whole 10 pixels. Yeah, exactly. Hunter Avalon will be debating Lawrence Southern. Oh. On May 13th at 6:30 p.m. I guess we will be watching that, yes.
كان يطلع تنمين وزمان.
ولا جبنا دواء ولا جبنا حاجة. ما جبت دواء الإسلام. ولا ما جبتش. بنجيب دواء.
يا الله يا العالم تقولوا منادين عليهم بالمدينة.
Anyway, you get the idea. That's people fleeing the Gaza Strip. Let's get to this BBC broadcast on them.
The UN has expressed fears of a full-scale war as the deadly conflict between Israeli forces and Palestinians continues for a third day. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned Palestinian militants that this was just...
Now, this is from yesterday, so it's not going to include up-to-date death numbers. It's not going to include up-to-date military operations, as in the ground forces are now engaged in the Gaza Strip. Not an invasion, but it seems to be they're at least firing into the Gaza Strip, especially artillery, for instance. It's not going to include up-to-date statements from officials, and it will not include any footage from today.
The beginning, threatening to strike with blows they haven't dreamed of. Tonight, President Biden said he had spoken to Mr. Netanyahu and said he hoped the violence would end sooner rather than later. At least 65 Palestinians, including 15 children, and 6 Israelis are reported to have been killed since Monday. In the past few days, Palestinian militants have fired a mass barrage of rockets into Israel, including on Tel Aviv. And Israel has carried out a heavy bombardment of Gaza, launching hundreds of airstrikes. Tensions have been growing in Jerusalem, partly fueled by a long-running threat to evict Palestinians from their homes in East Jerusalem. It all came to a head on Friday at Al-Aqsa Mosque.
By the way, ever since I uploaded my video on Palestine and Israel, I've gotten a lot of emails and DMs trying to justify the evictions, and not a single one of them have come even close in my mind to justifying the evictions, right? So I just want to be very clear that this is not okay. The international community obviously condemns this, and even the American administration looks upon it disapprovingly, and America backs Israel through basically everything.
The site where it stands is highly sensitive, sacred for both Muslims and Jews. Israeli police used CS gas and stun...
Okay, so this area is really important for a few reasons. Number one, the third holiest site of Islam, Al-Aqsa Mosque. I never know how to pronounce it correctly. Then, of course, for Jews, there's the Western Wall. And Jews consider this, like, you know, the Temple Mount, which is extremely important to the Jewish faith. So, and this is in the old city of Jerusalem specifically. This is of extreme religious importance. So when the when Israeli security forces raided the mosque, the third holiest site of Islam, yes, it was going to cause troubles, and that was only compounding the situation that started at the security apparatus being increased at the gates of Damascus, that eventually led into, after that was backed off on, the evictions in East Jerusalem. But I do want to bring up the fact that the court cases that would have decided the results of those evictions have been delayed after this escalation of violence.
Grenades at the mosque, and Palestinian youths threw rocks at them. Here's our Middle East correspondent, Tom Bateman.
The world's asking if the region's on the brink of war. People who work to this feel it's already here. Palestinians in Gaza face the fiercest Israeli bombardment since the last all-out conflict. Israel says it's going after militant leaders.
I do also want to bring up the fact that the Israeli government seems to have rejected multiple offers of a ceasefire. A mutual ceasefire by Hamas. I do want to bring that up. This was made via, if I remember, as people are bringing up to me and reminding me in chat, this was made via the Russian government. Thanks for reminding me. I appreciate it. Hamas offered a ceasefire. Let me Google it quick to make sure I'm not wrong. Can you clarify, are they bombing civilians? Okay, so we have no evidence that the Israeli government is deliberately targeting civilians, as in their goal is to kill civilians, nothing else. What is happening is that they're targeting different sites in the Gaza Strip that they see of military significance, but have civilians in them. And so their strikes are supposed to target Hamas operatives, probably Islamic Jihad operatives, but they keep killing civilians due to the density of the Gaza Strip and due to the fact that many of these buildings have children in them and civilians in them. So it's more, many people would point, as I would, as to a carelessness about their military strikes killing civilians rather than a concentration on killing civilians.
Some were killed in their homes. But civilians died in this strike, say Palestinian health officials. In Gaza, a territory under blockade, grief quickly turns to anger.
ايش بحكي جريمه هذه، ايش جريمه هذه؟ ناس مدنيه مرة في قلبها، مرة وولادها في قلبها، وواحد حلق وواحد واعي، هل انقصفوا؟ لا انقصف مقاوم ولا انقصف واحد مسؤول، احنا مدنيين نايمين في دورنا.
Dozens have died here since the violence erupted on Monday, and they're still counting their dead. Rocket fire from Gaza has continued deep into Israel.
Oh, and I want to say very clearly, so yesterday there was confusion around the question to a Secretary of State official, I think it was a State Department official, I think, over the idea of Palestinian self-defense and the inability for that official to answer the basic question of, do Palestinians have a right to self-defense? We watched that yesterday. It was a very interesting clip. I want to make clear, though, that a right to self-defense is not a right to just attack civilians. So Hamas, with its rockets that are attacking civilians, it isn't self-defense. Let me just be very clear about that. Let's not all start standing Hamas now, okay? They're a disgusting, terrible, anti-Semitic organization.
And the sirens are near non-stop in towns close by.
Okay, that's an interception. Let's get in. Jimmy. As we've heard airstrikes pound the Gaza Strip just a couple of miles away throughout the course of this morning into the afternoon. More retaliation, more fire from Gaza.
Under fire, Asher and his son Maor ran for safety, but their neighbour, an 89-year-old woman, didn't make it. She's seriously injured. Her carer died in the strike.
זה משגע הדבר הזה. זה לא יכול להיות. זה דבר, שמע, אנשים פה איבדו את החיים שלהם.
There are growing international calls for restraint, but for now, it seems that no one here is listening.
It is the intensity of these attacks that has led both sides to say they will step up their strikes in retaliation. A descent into much further violence seems inevitable.
More rockets are shot down in Israel's skies. Tonight, in a mixed Jewish-Arab town, I saw how fear and chaos is spreading. Violence between Jews and Arabs inside Israel is spiralling. Here, Jewish extremists attack an
See, this is how you see a lot of these lynchings go down, is that a car will pass by and they'll check the car to see if there's a Jew or a Palestinian Arab in that vehicle. If there is a member of the other group in that car, they will pelt the car with rocks. The car might crash, or they'll do their best to pull the person out of the car and then beat the man half to death. Or woman, of course. That's how a lot of these lynchings are going down. That's actually how the one that went on live television on Israeli TV went down, where they pelted a car with rocks, pulled a man out of the car, and then beat him half to death. Now, they did claim, the people who beat him half to death, that he was trying to ram Jewish civilians, But that doesn't seem to be reflected in any of the video footage we've seen up to this point.
Ambulance, and then check a car to see if Arabs or Jews are inside. Along the coast, a popular Arab restaurant comes under attack. In another mixed town, a Jewish man is beaten by Arab Israelis. A synagogue has also been torched. Israel's leader calls it anarchy. A wave of anger that started in Jerusalem has spilled out to the occupied territories and into Israel itself. The country's engulfed.
By the way, due to this being the BBC and the vast majority of the world recognizing that Palestine is occupied, they just say occupied territories like that. It's like not even like a contentious thing like, ooh, we gotta, ooh, can we really like dance around the word? They just say it because it's the truth.
In multiple flashpoints. It may be too late to contain it now. A curfew being enforced in one of those towns. It seems to be largely ineffective tonight. And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that he is now considering sending in army troops to some of those areas experiencing those kinds of confrontations. As to the wider military conflict,
Benjamin Netanyahu did make a statement during a press conference condemning the lynchings that are going on. He basically said, we condemn lynchings of Arabs and we condemn lynchings of Jews. My problem is, though, that he has yet to stop or do anything to really stop the lynchings besides like placative statements like, oh, the violence is bad. Like, okay, dope. I'm sure everybody who is a decent human being agrees with that. Now, can you do the moves to stop the violence? Doesn't seem to be the case. Maybe he's saying he might send army troops. Who knows?
As you were saying, Sophie, the US President Joe Biden says that his expectation and hope is it should end sooner rather than later, while also saying that he believes Israel has the right to defend itself.
This really pissed me off. Of course, the Israeli government loved the statement from Joe Biden. This really pissed me off. And the reason it pissed me off isn't the idea that Israel doesn't have a right to self-defense. Of course it does. Of course Israel has a right to self-defense, right? But the fact that he didn't mention the evictions going on, he didn't mention what happened at the mosque, he didn't mention the airstrikes that have killed children, he didn't mention any of these pieces of information, gives a very one-sided picture. It's the same problem with the Andrew Yang tweet. It's not that he called out Hamas and saying that people shouldn't have to live under the fear of Hamas or Islamic Jihad's rockets. Of course that's the case. No one should have to scurry over to bomb shelters because people are launching rockets at your city. All of us would hate to live in that reality. But when you are a public figure, people put people put a lot of weight in your words, and you need to be very careful to give a full picture of the situation, to not give people a slanted view of what's going on. So it's not, as I think some people have tried to suggest, the problem isn't that he called out Hamas, called out the rocket strikes, is that you need to give a full picture. Definitely for Joe Biden, someone who is the leader of the military, leader of the United States, the most powerful nation in the world, and the #1 ally of the state of Israel. So, I just wanted to clarify that, okay? Again, no standing Hamas. I'm guessing it's because Biden is being tight-lipped for domestic purposes. I just hope that behind closed doors they put a lot of pressure on Israel to agree to a ceasefire. I know America is sending diplomats. I know that Sullivan talked to the Israeli government, but it seems like after Hamas did offer a ceasefire through Russia, and that was rejected. And it seemed to be rejected under the idea that, hey, if we accept a ceasefire now, then we'll just have to do this later. So it seems that the Israeli government right now is pretty committed to this. And this right here, by the way, is a political, I've already said this, but it's a political lifeline to Netanyahu. Netanyahu was under so much pressure, right? He was in the middle of a corruption scandal and investigation. He was unable to win clear majorities in round after round after round after round of elections. He was unable to build a coalition to actually control the Knesset. He was being turned on by the Israeli far right after he restricted access to the Temple Mount due to the escalating violence. But we are seeing in real time as the coalition that was forming to oppose him and to make a government collapse, as the right-wing portion of that government has fallen out, probably mostly due to the recent escalation in violence. And it seems that Israel is going to be headed towards another election. And if there is anything that could help Bibi and his party, it is an escalating violent situation with Hamas and Islamic Jihad as rockets are fired in to Israel and people have to run and scurry to bomb shelters. If you want any propaganda for the common Israeli citizen, or anything to motivate the common Israeli citizen to go to the right, it's gonna be an escalation of rocket attacks. So there is not only from an Israeli government perspective, a strategic reason not to accept a ceasefire, as they have the overwhelming power of the situation and military strength, but there's also a deep political motivation for Benjamin Netanyahu, or boy Bibi, to not accept a ceasefire. Hey, the more you can deviate from the corruption scandal, the more you can take PR away from the coalition building against you. This is exactly what Bibi would need for an electoral victory heading into another round of elections. I don't even know which round of elections this is going to be. This is going to be another round. No evidence equals pure conspiracy theory. Do you really think that Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli right does not benefit from Hamas firing rockets and conflict in the Gaza Strip? This is very basic. In fact, again, the Israeli caller who called into my show yesterday made this point directly to my face. He called in specifically to say, Dylan, I know that the Israeli far right has turned on Benjamin Netanyahu for what happened at the Temple Mount, but remember that this type of stuff always benefits the Israeli far right in the long term. And I agreed with him. And as we see the political coalition against him collapsing, what are we supposed to think? Are we really going to pretend that politics doesn't at all play a part into this? Military and foreign policy decisions are made not a lot of times only due to strategic positions, but due to domestic concerns and how the domestic population will respond to it. This is actually a big concern in the IR field, the idea of politicians making deeply important foreign policy decisions based not upon the effectiveness of those decisions, but based on the popularity of them. This is not like a new thing. This has been known for a very long period of time. People, when stuff like this happen, get, quite honestly, very bloodthirsty electorally in who they vote for.
But with more airstrikes pounding the Gaza Strip in the last couple of hours.
A great other example would be, here's another example that we can all know, we all will have to acknowledge. Look at immigration policy and refugee policy in Europe. The best thing to do, and you can disagree with me, would be accept these refugees, build camps for them. Longer term, they could have some beneficial economic effects. It's the most humanitarian thing to do. This is something we're going to have to possibly get used to as climate disasters continue to spiral out of control, and we might have a lot of climate refugees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And left-wing parties usually are supposed to have that position. But once the refugees started coming and people started to sour towards the idea of taking refugees, what did the left in Europe do on immigration and refugee policy? They didn't choose what would be the most effective way to deal with the crisis and sharing the burden throughout Europe to save lives and protect economies. Instead, they moved to the right, and started taking on anti-refugee policies. This happens as well in foreign policy scenarios. This is not a radical position. This is not conspiracy theory. For somebody to suggest that people don't make foreign policy decisions based on domestic appeal is ridiculous. We look at the entirety of Trump's campaign and we saw that. Somebody who pretended that he didn't support the invasion of Iraq because it was no longer popular. Someone who pretended to not support what happened, the intervention in Libya, after he supported it live on television. Somebody who talked about our need to bomb civilians. We need to ban Muslim. These aren't things that would be effective in like building a international system that would be helpful. This isn't something that would be effective in helping the American economy or bringing peace to these regions. This is something that was beating the drum to a far-right base who didn't care about bombing civilians in the Middle East when Trump said, we need to bomb the families of terrorists. Or the Muslim ban. The former president of the United States, went on a stage and proceeded to be elected after saying, I am calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. Now, did he take into consideration that actually American Muslims are less radical than a lot of different Christian sects in the United States? No. Did he take into consideration the constitutionality of that statement when it comes to discrimination against religious groups? No. When he went to Rudy Giuliani after Rudy Giuliani confirmed this on Fox and Friends and said, how do we do this legally? And then proceeded to try to attempt it before having to kind of jiggle it a little, change a few words in it to make it so it could actually get through on a constitutional basis. Why did he do that? He did it to play to his base. It was a domestic political move that was not going to increase the security of the United States or protect its citizens. And in fact, statements like that actually probably increased instability in American Muslims' neighborhoods, that hate crimes increased. This dude is full of it. Please tell me how I'm wrong. Do you really believe that political decisions are not made based off of, when it comes to foreign policy, based off of domestic appeal? That's a ridiculous assertion. It feels like baby's first foreign policy class.
And more rocket fire within that time. That certainly seems, from this perspective, a long way off.
Our Middle East correspondent Tom Bateman in Jerusalem. Thank you. Well, let's talk to Rushdi Abualouf, who's in Gaza City. And what's the situation there tonight?
The sound of bombs and airstrikes are continue shortly after midnight here in Gaza. It's been the longest day of fighting since years. Israel hit hundreds of targets, and Hamas, the militancy group, fired hundreds of rockets.
If Trump wanted to ban Muslims, why didn't he ban Indonesia? Because what he proposed on the campaign trail was illegal. And he went to Rudy Giuliani. This is all public information. I don't know how people still live in this world. He went to Rudy Giuliani and asked how to do it legally. What does a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States sound like? A total and complete shutdown of Islamic radicals who specifically have an interpretation of the Quran that is in a violent manner that could hurt civilians. That's not what he said. He said Muslims. He then went to Rudy Giuliani, asked how we could do it legally. The first proposal was rejected. The second one got through after they finagled it enough to make it constitutional and not unconstitutional. The timeline's very clear there.
This situation is leaving this place in a very grim sort of picture. People are suffering from the sound of sonics.
By the way, let's look at this. There's some scenes from Gaza. This is children celebrating Eid, I probably pronounced it wrong, during heavy IDF shelling. It's become a common part of everyday life. So sad.
Of bombing, a very angry and shocking mood to see the scale of destruction around the Gaza Strip after this very long day and very long night of fighting. And it doesn't seem the night is over yet. In the last 5 minutes, the Israeli airplanes have targeted a place in Khan Yunis. They are talking about also casualties in the place, and the latest Health Ministry figure is talking about more than 60 people killed, half of them are civilians.
Rushdi Abualouf, thank you very much.
Half of them are civilians. If every time I pulled the trigger on a gun, there was a 50-50% chance it killed somebody that I was not aiming for, I'd be a lot more hesitant to pull that trigger.
Well, it's the worst violence in the region for 7 years. Tensions have been mounting in Jerusalem throughout the holy month of Ramadan. Our correspondent Caroline Hawley looks at what has sparked this deadly confrontation.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians hasn't made headlines in recent years, but it's been a tinderbox waiting to explode. The spark, Jerusalem, a city of sacred sites and simmering tensions, the heart of the conflict. And now, with depressing familiarity, it's ignited violence once again. So what's behind the latest escalation? Palestinian anger has been mounting for weeks. There have been clashes over a threat to evict dozens of families from their homes in Israeli-occupied East Jerusalem in favour of Jewish settlers. There's also been trouble between Israeli police and Palestinians infuriated by restrictions on them gathering at the entrance to the old city at sunset. And then, on the last weekend of Ramadan, came clashes at Al-Aqsa Mosque, where Israeli
Al-Aqsa, okay, that's how you pronounce it. Okay.
Security forces said Palestinians had been throwing stones. On Monday, Israel accused worshippers of preparing to attack a planned march by Israeli hardliners, and troops stormed into the holy compound. Hamas, which rules the Gaza Strip, is now portraying itself as the protector of Jerusalem, the defender of Muslim worshippers. It's called its barrages of rocket fire Operation Sword of Jerusalem. So why does Jerusalem matter so much? The importance of Jerusalem...
Okay, so this is getting like very simplistic, but it's important for both Israelis and Muslims, because it has the third holiest site of Islam, it has the old city of Jerusalem, it has the Western Wall. Yeah, I mean, yes.
Jerusalem is perhaps the one thing that the two sides can actually agree on. It has both religious and national significance. The Israelis see it as their eternal, undivided capital, while for the Palestinians, they want it, or at least the eastern part of it, as the capital of their future state. But this latest escalation has gone way beyond Jerusalem. It's revived memories of the war in Gaza in 2014, which left more than 2,000 Palestinians and dozens of Israelis dead. That's the last time there was an explosion of violence on this scale. So what's been the international response?
The international response has overwhelmingly been negative. Out of the Security Council, 14 of the 15 members voted to condemn what Israel is doing in East Jerusalem when it comes to evictions, to condemn the raid on the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Who do you think was the one member who didn't allow that to go through? And by the way, Security Council's screwed because you need every single member to agree on something or to abstain. There's abstentions are also taken in for something to go through. I've always despised that. It is probably the biggest, one of the worst things stopping internationalism from like further developing. It's the United States, though. We were the one person who stopped it. And a response to that was that, hey, this would just worsen the situation to condemn this. We will do direct diplomatic negotiations. Well, ceasefires have been proposed and rejected. The bombing is escalating. The rockets are escalating. Lynchings are happening throughout Israel. Joe Biden has yet to make any strong statement outside of Israel has a right to defend itself. Sullivan had his conversation with Israeli officials. Ground forces are now engaged in Gaza. Where does the direct diplomatic negotiations start to, like, kick in? Wait, there are lynchings in Israel? Yes. There have been lynchings literally on live television. Now, they were not covered fairly by live television, but the camera turned over and it was just a lynching occurring on live TV. Live Israeli TV.
One of growing alarm. The UN Secretary-General said peace talks were the only way forward and must be revived. Boris Johnson and the Americans urged Israelis and Palestinians to step back from the brink.
We believe Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live with safety and security. And we'll continue to engage with Israelis, Palestinians, and other regional partners to urge de-escalation and to bring calm.
But for now, neither side show the slightest sign of backing down. And as so often, it's civilians on both sides paying.
Okay, that seems like a little like BS, because again, ceasefires were proposed, but whatever.
The price. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
Okay. It's just artillery, they're not invading. Yeah, we've clarified that a few times today. Okay. Oof.